Alright, so today I want to show you how a snake rack is set up. I've actually had quite a few questions under a lot of my videos, and people are asking how are these racks actually set up? And if you actually look at these racks right behind me, the racks here in my reptile room, these are all made by ARS Caging. Pretty much the best of the best racks. These are really nice racks. As a matter of fact, a lot of people are asking a lot of questions like how do you heat the tubs in the back? What does the heat source look like? And does it heat from the bottom of the tub or the back of the tub? A lot of people have actually asked what thermostat I use to heat these racks. Some people have asked where do I put the probe for the thermostat? And probably the number one question that I've been asked a lot is why do you use racks instead of, for example, like a glass aquarium with a hide in it? So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to just kind of give you a tour of my rack systems, maybe pull some tubs out, show you the inner workings of some of these racks, and show you why I choose to use a rack system over any other type of enclosure for my ball pythons. Alright, so I'm going to give you a quick tour of the reptile room, just kind of pan left and right. I have about 200 square feet down here, which isn't a whole lot of room, and I have an incredible amount of racks squeezed down here in my 200 square foot room, which is pretty amazing. And what I actually want to do is I want to start with this hatchling rack, which is currently completely empty. I'm actually waiting for some eggs to hatch in the incubator to fill it up. As a matter of fact, I just moved some of my hatchlings over to some of my ARS 5040s. I keep moving them up through the different sizes as the snakes get older and mature. So you pretty much always need different size tubs to keep moving your snakes as they age and mature, which is kind of the hard part about a rack system because you need so many different sizes of tubs for all the different sizes of snakes. So essentially how this rack actually works, you actually have these tubs that completely pull out all the way, which is pretty awesome for cleaning. So you can completely clean this really super easy to clean. And then in the back of the tub, you actually have a heat strip that's underneath the back of the tub. Everyone's like, hey, where's the heat in the tub? The heat is actually just one little strip right in the back. And when the ball python eats a meal, what it'll actually do is it'll go back to the hot spot and digest its meal. And then after it's digested, it'll actually come up to the front into kind of a cooling cycle until it eats again. So a ball python will constantly move back and forth between the hot side and the cold side, depending on if it's eaten and if it needs to digest that food, which is kind of an interesting cycle that they kind of go through. I've actually had a lot of people say, hey, my ball python's up on the cool side for days. Then that's probably because it hasn't eaten in a really long time, or for a while it's completely digested all its food and it moves up to the cool side to kind of cool down. It's also kind of, if you have big ball pythons like a breeding female, a lot of times they'll come up and wrap around the bowl is part of the kind of the egg laying process. They'll go back and forth from the hot side to the cool side depending on the size of the follicles in that ball python. So it really depends on the snake, the size of the snake, and the hot side and the cold side. But if you're wondering how I actually control that, I actually control it with a thermostat right back up here. So take a look at this. I actually have it set on 90 degrees and you can see my probe is actually at 88. So it is heating right now. So it goes up and down between 88 to 90 degrees. And it really depends on the thermostat. So some thermostats are a lot more accurate than that one. That's a VE100 that just has pretty much an on and an off. So if you actually pull this out, I can actually show you kind of the dusty, dirty part of the back. I actually cleaned these a couple of years ago, but it's been a while since I cleaned these. But usually you don't even look at the some of the stuff in the back. So I can actually show you how some of these work. So you can definitely tell I have not prepared for this video because these are like really super dusty, super dusty. But essentially what it is you actually have this heat panel right here that you can, as a matter of fact, you can actually pull these off. These are Velcroed right on. And if you look at the bottom of the heat panel, take a look at that. You can actually see the heat strip. It's actually one of the flexible heat strips that you'd buy in a roll. And that is actually glued to the other side of this heat panel. So it's like your typical roll of a heat strip, like your flexible heat strip, but it's actually glued to a panel. And this is all done by ARS. They just give you they give you like 1,000,000 parts for this one, because you have to actually put it together. You have all these little plastic pieces and metal pieces and all these strips. It takes quite a long time to actually put this together. But you know, some of them, depending on if they're hybrids or not, some of them come completely assembled, where you actually just get one level that you have to take off and put it on another level. So this one's a little bit more tricky to set up. Some of them come completely assembled on a pallet if you get the non-hybrid ones, which is pretty wild. So that's where the heat comes from. And then essentially what happens is, if I spin it around a little bit more, you'll see that all the different heat panels are plugged into this really big power strip. It's like I don't know if it's like a 6-foot tall power strip, I guess, on the back of that. So all the heat panels are plugged into this one power strip, and then the power strip is actually plugged into the heat controller. So when the heat controller comes on, it turns on this entire power strip. It's all controlled by one heat controller. So then kind of the dilemma as far as kind of setting up a system like this, especially if you're just using one heat controller, is you only have one temperature probe right here, and you're always like, well, where do I put the temperature probe, you know, for the whole rack? I need to control the temperature. So what I actually do is I put the temperature probe right in the middle of the rack, which kind of controls the middle the best. So if you actually look at the temperature of what is actually set at, that is the set point and the control for the middle of the rack. So I've actually noticed that if you actually kind of set it up like this, the bottom of the rack and the top of the rack will be slightly cooler than the middle of the rack. So sometimes it can be a little bit off from the top and the bottom. And I've actually, you know, I've actually had like hatchlings and grow outs in a setup like this, and I've never really had any problems as far as not having the hot spot kind of set right. But yeah, it's a lot of electrical on that one, and a lot of heat strips that actually go into this setup, which is pretty wild. So another one I actually want to show you is, I want to show you this rack over here, because this one is completely different how I set this one up. So this is a little bit extreme. I'd say this is pretty non-typical as far as a setup for a rack. So on this one actually houses all my female ball pythons, and all my females, I actually wanted individual heat controllers for every single level. So I actually have 9 levels in this entire rack. So I wanted all the levels precisely controlled, so my females would lay eggs on 90-degree hot spots. So what I actually did is, if you actually look up at my heat controllers up here, I have a whole bunch of different heat controllers. Up here, take a look at this. I actually have some Herbstat 4s, 4 different controllers, 4 different temperature probes for each Herbstat 4. So 2 of those can control 8 levels. And then I have another one over on the right that controls the boa tub down here for my reticulated python. So every single one actually has its own control. And talk about wiring in the back. I have so many wires in the back because I have all those different heat probes that come down to every single one. So that's kind of the setup as far as, you know, I'd say that's kind of extreme. I'd say most people will just take one probe and put it on one kind of a whole rack. As a matter of fact, if you actually look at this rack, I'd say what most people would actually do on this is probably the minimum they would do is they put 3 different heat controllers. So for example, they'd actually take the ARS 18s, put 1 probe right in the middle, and then plug all those into a power strip, and then take that power strip, run it into 1 heat controller, and have 1 control for that. Because the problem is usually, you know, for a different size tub, you have a different size heat strip, and that will be controlled different than these over here. So if you had all these on one circuit and you controlled them, you know, so for example, if you actually put the probe down here, the hot spots on the smaller tubs would actually be a different current and wouldn't get as hot, and you'd have a huge variability between the two. So I'd say what most people do is they'll actually put these, the ARS 18s on one circuit with 1 probe. They'd put the boa tub on a completely separate circuit with another probe, and then they put the ARS 7030s on another circuit, you know, put them all together on another controller and another thermostat with just one probe on those. But what I actually did is I put, you know, controllers on every single level, which is kind of excessive. So if you can actually follow all that, you know, you really don't want to mix and match and put them all on the same thermostat, because you can have really big differences between those. And another thing I did with this is kind of an add-on over here. If you actually take a look at what I did over on the side over here, these are as a matter of fact, I have one that's completely went out. I'll have to check the batteries on this. What I did over here is I put a separate kind of an alarm over here on some of these. So essentially what I actually found is, you know, the really fancy, the thermostats that you buy for, you know, a lot of money, like those Herbstat 4s, if you actually came over here and unplugged them from the wall, you'd actually not get any of the alarms that you'd see on that are kind of built into the Herbstat, because if you unplug the power, you completely lose all the alarms. So this is kind of a backup on every single level. So say for example, if you unplugged it from the wall, all these would actually drift out of the range, and you can set them on, you know, the high alarm and the low alarm. And when I lose power in here, all these are actually all going off. I actually had them on every single level, but you really don't need them on every single level. You can just put them on a few levels, or even on one if you keep an eye on it. So that's another kind of a backup alarm system in case I lose power to the room, or if I lose power to just one of the Herbstats up on top. Alright, so that is the setup for these racks as far as how the heat strips work, the thermostats, the probe placement, the different options, some of the extra alarms you can actually put on the side of the rack systems for kind of an extra security when the power goes out. And another thing I wanted to cover briefly before the end of this video, I actually wanted to cover why I use tubs instead of glass aquariums, one of the really big, hot, debated topics in the ball python industry. So as a matter of fact, when I first started in ball pythons, I actually used glass aquariums. I have a couple over here that I actually used this bottom one for ball pythons when I started. This is actually a glass critter cage that I'm currently using for my dubia roaches. I actually moved them into my reptile room because the temperature in here is perfect for breeding dubia roaches. And essentially what it is, it's a glass aquarium with a screen top on top of the aquarium. And I've seen a lot of people use this and recommend it. Like, for example, you actually go to YouTube, everyone's like, hey, how to set up a ball python enclosure for under $100, and it's always a glass aquarium. And the problem with the glass aquarium is essentially what you do is you use a hide over on one side of the aquarium that the ball python will pretty much live in the hide. As a matter of fact, when I started in ball pythons, I had all these wire shells all across my whole room on both sides of the room. And what I actually found is every single ball python was always in the hide all day and all night, would rarely come out of that hide, and would always be kind of stuck in that really small hide. And essentially what you're doing with ball pythons, so for example, if I actually had Bobby in, like, you know, he actually lives, Bobby, the snake that's around my neck at the beginning of every video, he actually lives in a tub of this size. So for example, if you actually took this size of a tub and you flipped it over, so you can kind of consider this to be the hide by itself. And then I've actually seen a lot of people say this, hey, if you actually have a full-size adult ball python, what you really need is you need like a 100-gallon aquarium to keep that ball python, because, you know, if you actually look at the size of the hide, you have the hide this big, and then you need more room in that aquarium for that ball python. So essentially what you're doing is you're taking, like, you know, it's not really practical to breed ball pythons and have 100-gallon aquariums for every single ball python in your collection. So kind of the way to compromise is to take the hide by itself and then put that in a rack system, since the ball python pretty much lives in the hide full time. And I've actually found it was pretty amazing. If you actually took all my ball pythons, and if I should have taken a video right at the beginning, they're all like stuck in the little hide in the glass aquarium, and you take them from there and you put them in a gray tub like this that simulates a really big living space for a ball python. Let me tell you, it is day and night as far as how that ball python will eat and grow and really thrive in a tub like this. It's pretty amazing. And I've actually actually seen a lot of people, what they'll do is, I don't really agree with having tubs that are clear, because the problem is if you have a clear tub, essentially what that's simulating is that's simulating your glass aquarium. And then what you actually have to do with the clear tub, you have to put a hide in it, and then you have a ball python living in a tiny little spot in the back of your aquarium, basically, versus giving them like a gray tub that is, you know, the complete living space for a ball python. As a matter of fact, if you actually look at the top of the rack system, usually the first third over here is a whole bunch of tiny holes all at the top, so it lets just a little bit of light and some ventilation in the top, so it's not completely dark over the whole thing. They do have some light and some ventilation over the top of the thing, so it's not completely enclosed. So that's kind of the reason that I use tubs instead of glass aquariums. It just gives it so much more space. As a matter of fact, if you actually take a look at, you know, some of these really big ones, like this one over here, take a look at this. This is like my really big female. She's like a 5,000 gram ball python, and this whole enclosure acts as her hide. So if you actually took a hide this big and you put it on in a really big glass aquarium, I don't even know if you can get a glass aquarium big enough to, you know, kind of flip this over and make a hide of it and then cut a hole in it. But, you know, essentially that's what you're doing with a really big enclosure like this, and that's what you really need for a really big 5,000 gram female like this. And like Bobby over here, he is, you know, completely happy in a tub this size, you know, no problems at all, thriving in a tub in the middle of this rack, and he absolutely loves it here in this rack. And this is kind of what I use as far as the setup. You know, I have the coconut husk in here, and then the water. I actually just kind of reuse these cups. And, you know, a good thing about this is, you know, I would recommend if you have snakes in tubs like this, probably a good idea would be to take your snake out and kind of let them, you know, stretch and kind of get out of the tub every few days. That's what I do. You know, I go through and kind of spot clean, and when I'm spot cleaning, I'll take the snake and put it around my neck and let him crawl around a little bit while I'm spot cleaning the tub. And it gets them a little time out of the tub so they can kind of get out, you know, so they're not in there full time. But let me tell you, even with Bobby, if I have him around my neck for an extended period of time, like 30 minutes, 45 minutes, most of the times he's like, all right, I want to go back in my tub, and he just loves it in there. He's completely happy in his tub, which is, you know, it's kind of contrary to what a lot of people think, that they don't think the tubs are really that good for ball pythons. And I found just the opposite, that it seems like they really thrive in these tubs, especially the gray tubs, which is pretty fascinating. So that is pretty much it. That is how a rack system works for ball pythons, and that's why I use the rack systems. I think they're a lot better than pretty much any other system that you can use. The only thing that, so, you know, if you had, you know, kind of the idea like a zoo kind of a setup, what you could actually do is you could have like one ball python in like a really big space, you know, like with, you know, jungles and water fountains and everything, and then just have a really big hide. I mean, if you just had like just a couple snakes, you could probably get a really big glass aquarium, really deck, you know, the whole thing out with a lot of stuff, and just have one big enclosure in the back for the ball python. But let me tell you, if you're keeping like, you know, a whole bunch of snakes, this is pretty much the best kind of a system as far as multiple snakes are, you know, for ball pythons. And I've actually found, and one more thing I should add at the end, I've actually tried this with other types of snakes. And I've actually, for example, I've actually tried corn snakes in tubs like this. And I don't really think corn snakes really like a tub system like this. I think really, you know, they're designed for ball pythons that really thrive in dark places. As a matter of fact, if I had a corn snake, I would probably do a big glass aquarium that had a lot of kind of decorations and logs and stuff. I had corn snakes, and it seemed like my corn snakes were always out on the logs, out in the open, and didn't really go in the hide as much as the ball python. So I think it really depends on the species of snake too, as far as what snake you put in a rack system like this. So that is pretty much it. Hope you learned something. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.